I don't know what it is.
Fine-tuning. It may be something related to how the universe is created.
Fine-tuning?
By who? Who's fine-tuning the universe?
The golden, what's it called? What's this? There's a phrase for it, isn't it? The golden lock.
That we are in like the perfect place, basically, in order for life to thrive. If we were any closer to the sun, any further away, we'd freeze or burn.
No, not really. I don't know what that would be.
Maybe the theory that someone or like something tweaked the universe and sort of picked certain things to happen.
Fine-tuning of the universe. I don't know, is it like it kind of has its own life or like its own kind of movement, maybe?
It's the life on Earth is because of that fine-tuning. There are other places where that, for example, in terms of how near and how far away we are from Sun.
Well, the idea that there is a such finely tuned and the level of that if Earth would be just a few meters off, we couldn't exist here.
I guess it could mean that there are limits or adjustments to the functions which we wouldn't necessarily expect.
Professor John Lennox lives outside Oxford, where he is Emeritus Professor of Mathematics at the University of Oxford and Emeritus Fellow in Mathematics and Philosophy of Science at Green Templeton College, the University of Oxford. He's also an Associate Fellow of the Said Business School and teaches at the Oxford Strategic Leadership Programme. He's published more than 70 mathematical papers and is the co-author of 2 research-level texts in algebra, which I'm sure you'll find in your library, if you don't already have them at home, published by the Oxford Mathematical Monographs series. If you're struggling with insomnia, I recommend them. John is a friend, and I think I might get away with that. I'm hoping I'll get away with that. John has lectured extensively around the world on mathematics, the philosophy of science, and the intellectual defense of Christianity. He's also produced numerous books exploring the interface of science, philosophy, and theology, including God's Undertaker, Has Science Buried God?, 7 Days That Divide the World, God and Stephen Hawking. A recent publication, a short, easy way into this topic, is his book, Can Science Explain Everything? And his other book, which we recommend, Determined to Believe. Alongside his lectures and writing, he has taken part in many public discussions with academics around the world. He has debated with such high-profile atheists as the late Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, and Peter Singer.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming. I thought when my friend Stephen Shaw referred to my exceedingly inaccessible mathematics books, he was going to add the official definition of a pure mathematician, which is a person who talks in other people's sleep. And so I warn you that you might be tempted to do that tonight. I am currently an Emeritus Professor of Pure Mathematics at the University of Oxford and an Emeritus Fellow at Green Templeton College. Emeritus, of course, is just a nice way of saying I am old, but that's fairly obvious anyway. I spend much of my time writing books on the interface of science, philosophy, and theology, and give lectures and take part in public discourse. My first 18 years were spent in Northern Ireland, a country sadly marred by sectarian violence. My father ran a general-purpose store in Armagh, the ecclesiastical capital of all Ireland, with its two cathedrals, both called after St. Patrick, one Protestant, the other Catholic, gazing, or perhaps glaring at one another from their respective hilltops. But remarkably, I had parents who were Christian but not sectarian. In particular, they taught me that all people, irrespective of their worldview, were of equal value. They practiced it. My father tried to employ equally across the religious divide, and he paid for it by having his business bombed in later years a number of times. I remember listening to the 1 o'clock news on the BBC when they announced that a bomb had exploded in Armagh. And somehow I knew intuitively that it was Lennox's shop, and soon discovered that my brother David had been nearly killed in the blast, losing the sight of one eye and having to have 300 stitches put in his face to hold it together. It did not destroy his Christian commitment. But more than that, my parents loved me enough to encourage me to think for myself and to consider worldviews other than their own, which was Christianity. Indeed, my father, who'd been denied higher education but strongly encouraged mine, he gave me a copy of the Communist Manifesto when I was about 14 years old. "Dad, why should I read that?" I asked. "Because you need to know what other people think." He, of course, balanced that by introducing me to a lifelong love of the writings of C.S. Lewis. I went to school in Armagh and then to Emmanuel College, Cambridge for 7 years to study mathematics. Ending up with a PhD, I moved to the University of Wales in Cardiff, and I've spent the last 20 in Oxford. I've been married for 51 years to the girl I met on day 2 in Cambridge. I went to a church recommended by a friend who had also informed me in advance, in rather quaint language, "John, there is a man in Cambridge with 4 daughters." And there they were, very noticeable. The eldest one, Sally, looked just right, as I later discovered she was. And she has been a magnificent supporter and critic in all that I do, and a wonderful mother to our 3 children and 10 grandchildren, which of course obliges us to cough up for birthdays every 3 weeks or so. What is the fine-tuning argument? The fundamental forces and constants of physics are themselves delicately balanced or fine-tuned in order for the universe to be able to sustain life. When I was at Cambridge, one of my lecturers in cosmology was Dennis Sciama, a Mancunian who had been trained by the brilliant physicists Dirac and Bondi. He explained fine-tuning this way: if you change a little bit the laws of nature, or you change a little bit the constants of nature, like the charge on the electron, then the way the universe develops is so changed. It is very likely that intelligent life would not have been able to develop. So let's imagine what we might call a universe generator, a machine with dials that control the values of those physical constants. And you'll see my version is very sophisticated. It produces 3 universes at once. Now, to get our universe, we must set these dials very carefully to a specific position. if we alter their settings even by a little, we might get a different universe, or more likely, none at all. Now, one of the great characters in cosmology was Sir Fred Hoyle. He was one of the fearsome examiners for my finals at Cambridge. And I recall very vividly him coming to Cardiff and saying to a packed audience that he'd done the mathematical calculations and shown that life could not have originated on Earth, but had arrived from outer space on comets. There was a huge intake of incredulous breath. Now, Hoyle was interested that for life to exist on Earth, an abundant supply of carbon is needed. Carbon is formed either by combining 3 helium nuclei or by combining nuclei of helium and beryllium. He found that for this to happen, the nuclear ground state levels have to be fine-tuned with respect to each other. This phenomenon is called resonance. If the variation were more than 1% either way, the universe could not sustain life. Hoyle said, "It looked as if a super intellect has monkeyed about with physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces in nature worth talking about." He also said, intriguingly, that nothing shook his atheism like that discovery. He was most impressed by that single example of fine-tuning. British astronomer royal Lord Rees wrote a book entitled Just 6 Numbers, about 6 of the fundamental constants of nature. One of them is associated with the energy released in the fusion reaction within stars as hydrogen gets converted to helium. It is a value of 0.007. And Martin Rees says that if it were reduced to 0.006, the universe would be entirely composed of hydrogen, and there would be no chemistry and no life. On the other hand, if it were increased by the same amount, there would be no fuel for stars, no water, and no life. But these examples of the band of tolerance involved in fine-tuning pale into insignificance when we consider the fineness of the tuning of some of the other parameters of nature. For instance, there are 4 fundamental forces in nature that make the universe the way it is. 2 of these are the electromagnetic force and the gravitational force. The electromagnetic force is what holds atoms together, and it's fundamental to chemistry. And gravity is what weighs on my mind whenever I try at my age to go upstairs. Now, the ratio of these 2 constants must be very delicately balanced. Imagine increasing it by 0.3801%, which is a very small amount, something like the tiny, tiny probability of winning the national lottery 6 weeks in a row. If that is the case, only small stars can exist. Decrease this ratio by the same amount, and there will only be large stars. And you've got to have both large and small stars in the universe. The large ones produce elements in their thermonuclear furnaces, and it is only the small ones that burn long enough to sustain a planet with life. To use an illustration, again due to Paul Davies, that's the kind of accuracy a marksman would need to hit a coin at the far side of the observable universe 20 billion light years away. Now, this is impressive, but again, it's trumped by the example given by Sir Roger Penrose, arguably one of the brightest, most brilliant mathematical physicists alive today. He says that in order to get a universe like ours in which an entropy law holds, that is, in which disorder increases so that even your Aston Martin will rust, the Creator's aim, and that's his phrase, not mine, the Creator's aim must be accurate to 1 in 10 to the power 10 to the power 123. A number so large that if you put a 1 here and a 0 on every elementary particle in the universe, you cannot write it out. In other words, take all the particles in the universe, put a special mark on one of them, the prize atom, say, and then blindfold, you have to pick it out of the entire universe. The probability of doing so is still a much larger number than Penrose's aiming creator. Now, when you add this up, one discovers that a great majority of scientists of varying worldview persuasions accept that the universe is fine-tuned for life. For instance, Alan Sandage, George Ellis, Don Page, Frank Tipler, and John Polkinghorne are theists. Stephen Weinberg, Roger Penrose, Martin Rees, Stephen Hawking are atheists. The fact is that virtually no one makes a serious challenge to the basic proposition that the universe is improbably fine-tuned for life. So how is this fine-tuning to be explained? Now, one obvious candidate is that there is a creator God who is the fine-tuner. And we shouldn't forget that this belief dominated the intellectual landscape for centuries and contributed to the rise of modern science. But let's first think about other explanations. Some cite what is called the Anthropic Principle, from the Greek word anthropos, for man. It asserts we should not be surprised to find ourselves in a universe like this, because only in such a universe could beings like ourselves appear. Putting this another way, the observable universe has a structure which permits the existence of observers. This can sound very impressive. However, it does not explain anything. It is a truism. All it says is that for life to exist, certain necessary conditions must be fulfilled. But it does not tell us the answer to two key questions: why those necessary conditions are fulfilled, nor how, even granted they are fulfilled, life did in fact arise. The Anthropic Principle is therefore not an explanation. Rather, it points to what needs explaining. Why is the universe suitable for life, and how did it come to be so? This is something that Richard Dawkins appears not to have grasped in his book, The God Delusion, where he says, what the religious mind fails to grasp is that the two candidate solutions are offered to the problem. God is one, the Anthropic Principle is the other. Not so. The Anthropic Principle is not an explanation at all. And philosopher John Leslie illustrates this confusion as follows. He says that using the Anthropic Principle against design sounds like arguing that if you faced a firing squad with 50 guns trained on you, you should not be surprised to find that you were alive after they had fired. After all, that's the only outcome you could possibly have observed. If one bullet had hit you, you'd be dead. Really? Might you not feel that there's something which very much needs explaining? Namely, why did they all miss? Was it by deliberate design? For you see, there is no inconsistency in not being surprised that you do not observe that you are dead, and being surprised to observe that you're still alive. Stephen Hawking, also an atheist who was ahead of me in Cambridge and light years ahead of me in his mathematical ability, proposed another kind of solution in his book, The Grand Design, co-authored with Leonard Mlodinow. Our universe, he says, and its laws appear to have a design that is both tailor-made to support us, and, if we are to exist, leaves little room for alteration. That is not easily explained, and raises the natural question of why it is that way. The discovery relatively recently of the extreme fine-tuning of so many of the laws of nature could lead at least some of us back to the old idea that this grand design is the work of some grand designer. That is not the answer of modern science. Our universe seems to be one of many, each with different laws. Please notice the reference to the old idea, as if an idea is false just because it is old. C.S. Lewis, in a wonderful turn of phrase, called this chronological snobbery. Hawking says that believing in a grand designer is not the answer of modern science. It would have been much more accurate to say that it is not the answer of some modern scientists, as there are many scientists today who do believe in a grand designer. And then Hawking's solution. Our universe seems to be one of many. And physicist Max Tegmark of MIT once said that the fine-tuning has two possible explanations. Either the universe is designed specifically for us by a creator, or there is a multiverse. That is, there are many universes. And just to explain briefly, one way of seeking to account for the remarkable improbability of a universe being fit for life is to say we are only one of a large number or infinite number, whatever that means, of universes. We just happen to live in the one with life. Now, we cannot see the other universes or visit them, but they must exist. Why? Because, in the view of some, that is the only way our universe can be as it is if it is not the product of a creator. Physicist John Polkinghorne, who taught me quantum mechanics at Cambridge, says there is no purely scientific reason to believe in a multiverse. These other worlds are not accessible to us. A possible and just as intellectually respectable explanation is that the universe is as it is because it is the will of a creator that it should be so. Cosmologist Edward Harrison says that he belongs to the group of scientists who do not subscribe to a conventional religion, but nevertheless deny that the universe is a purposeless accident. He is so impressed with fine-tuning that he writes, "Here is the cosmological proof of the existence of God. The design argument of Paley updated and refurbished. The fine-tuning of the universe provides prima facie evidence of deistic design. Take your choice. Blind chance that requires multitudes of universes, or design that requires only one." Many scientists, he adds, when they admit their views, incline towards the teleological or design argument. I have found that some atheist thinkers sense the force of this argument. Oxford philosopher Peter Millikan, with whom I participated in a very lively Oxford Union debate, said to me before a subsequent intellectual grilling by his students, "I hope that you are going to use your best argument against atheism." Well, I said, "Peter, can you tell me what it is and I'll use it?" He said, "If ever I was to become a believer in God, it would be because of the fine-tuning argument." Personally, I'm convinced that Penzias is right. Fine-tuning points towards the existence of a supernatural fine-tuner. And for me, that fits into a bigger picture, which is that there is a close relationship between faith in a creator and the rise of modern science. Sir Fred Hoyle again. Once we see, however, that the probability of life originating at random is so utterly minuscule as to make it absurd, it becomes sensible to think that the favorable properties of physics on which life depends are in every respect deliberate. It is therefore almost inevitable that our own measure of intelligence must reflect higher intelligences, even to the limit of God. I feel a kinship with the great pioneers of modern science, Galileo, Newton, Kepler, and so on, of whom C.S. Lewis said, "Men became scientific because they expected law in nature. And they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. The discovery of the rational laws on which the universe operates confirmed their faith in an intelligent creator. Putting that another way, far from hindering their science, their conviction that there was a creator was the motor that drove it. And Arno Penzias again reminds us that the notion that there is a teleological dimension goes back millennia. He says the best data we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. Indeed, the first of those books, the book of Genesis, has a unique take on fine-tuning when it describes God creating the world not all at once, but in a sequence of speech acts, and God said, that culminating with the making of humans in his own image. Now, the universe that I love to watch through my garden telescope shows the glory of God, but it wasn't made in his image. I know the sun and the stars are there. They do not know that I am here. We humans, uniquely made in his image, and that gives to each man and woman infinite value and dignity as they enter into the task of stewarding a fine-tuned world. Now, this is a wonderful example of what Francis Bacon, a pioneer of scientific thinking, called God's 2 books. The book of nature that we study scientifically, and the Bible, where we study the revelation of God. Science, the book of nature, reveals the fine-tuning. Genesis, the book of God, tells us about its purpose. Science cannot tell us that. Now, you might expect me to reject atheism because I believe Christianity to be true. That is so, but I also reject it because I'm a scientist. How could I be impressed with a worldview that appears to undermine the very rationality that we have to assume in order to do science? I believe that science and God mix very well. Science and atheism do not mix so well. If the creation and things in science are pointers for me towards God, then it raises the even greater question, and that is there communication from the God in whose image I have made? And so early on I discovered that at a point in history, the Word who is God became human to bring good news to us humans. You see, ladies and gentlemen, it is one thing to believe, and an important thing to believe, that there is a God behind the universe, in my view. It is another thing to get to know him. But that's a story for another time. Thank you very much.